Welcome, everybody, to the first lecture, Chapter 1 from your Getis textbook. Now, Chapter 1 is a short chapter. Some of the concepts in Chapter 1 do come up in some of the later chapters. This chapter provides an overview of geography as an academic discipline, some of its history and its importance in academia as well, and also talk about some of the issues in education, educational geography specifically. All right, let's get going, shouldn't we? Well, should we start at the beginning? I think a basic question is, what is geography? Well, geography isn't an easy subject to define, as you'll see, but the word itself comes from a Greek origin, the geo, which means earth, and graphos or graphian, sometimes it's shown as. Graphos means to write or to describe. So literally, geography is a subject that describes the earth. In modern days, it means the description of the Earth's surface for the most part. Geographers are concerned with anything that goes on Earth. Now, the word graphos means to write or to describe, but there's also another connotation too, because you may be involved in learning some computer graphics, or you have photography as a hobby. What does this graphos means? It means to depict, to draw. And that's very fortunate because in geography, the foremost tool of the geographer is the map. If you can show something on a map, it very often gets your major point across in geography. Okay, so it's the discipline that describes the earth. What are some of the things that are traditionally studied in geography? Well, the physical features, landforms, the glaciers, the different climatic regions, and the soils and ecosystems that go along with those. For example, geography studies the tropical rainforests or looks at the tropical savanna and the polar tundras and so forth, the middle latitude deciduous forest. That's the physical geography, and all of those things are traditionally studied. But also geography studies the human world too, agriculture, human populations, their distribution, and various issues such as, well, let's see, is the world overpopulated? Are we going to run out of resources? Why is it that some countries are rapidly growing in their population while others are in population decline? And also the industries, economies, and so forth are also traditionally part of the domain of geography. Learning, well, let's see, who makes what? It's sometimes said in economic geography that you have different place, a different product, different people. All right, and also traditionally geography has studied things such as world languages, world religions, dietary patterns, and so forth. All of these things. So all of this phenomena that occurs on Earth is fair game in geography. And that's a pretty tall order. So to be a geographer, you have to know pretty much everything in the world, anything that goes on, the physical environment, the cultural environment, and so forth here. However, there's a very important part that's down here that I want to talk about. Geography is important not just for what it studies, what subject matter it studies, but geography is also important in how it studies. And that's this part down here, because geography seeks to find interrelationships. Sometimes it's said that geography is a holistic discipline. It looks at the big picture. You get a step back or a map view on everything. You see how everything fits and relates to each other. So seeing some of these relationships is an important part of geography. Some things are pretty straightforward. I mean, the climate region and agriculture would fit together pretty well because what you can grow in an area is largely determined by how hot and how wet it is at different times of the year. But a lot of times there are these subtle relationships. Is there a relationship between environment and language? Why is it, as languages spread out and they evolve and cultural groups migrate away from each other, they encounter different types of environments and invent new words for things. Sometimes the physical surface, the landforms will isolate peoples and new languages get started over time. So geographers seek to study the interrelationships between phenomena. All right, so how everything relates to each other. I think that's easy to see. Here's the thing that's harder to see. Because geography is important for not only what it studies, but how it studies, and it looks at the spatial attributes to all of this worldly phenomenon. And that's the magic word in geography, is the word spatial. Geographers love to use it. We like to talk about spatial analysis and spatial distribution, spatial diffusion, and so forth. That's the magic word. And what does it mean, though? And have you ever conducted a spatial analysis? If I went around the classroom and asked each one of you, when's the last time you conducted a spatial analysis? You probably wouldn't know what I'm talking about. But you probably have, and you just haven't noticed it. And after you leave this class, you'll probably be saying that, you're doing a lot of spatial analyses in your major. All right, well, let's see. What does it literally mean when you talk about space? You may have seen the word spatial and in a class like art class. Sometimes they spell it with a C instead of the T, meaning space relationships there. Well, when geographers say spatial, it means space on the Earth. So we can talk about a spatial distribution of a phenomenon. For example, we can talk about the spatial distribution of population in North Carolina. Okay, the mountain counties are sparsely populated, maybe a few clusters of population here or there. The Piedmont counties is where most of the population is. In the coastal areas, you also have some clusters of population as well. So we talk about how they're distributed, and also diffusion. You'll see that this is another of the magic words in geography. Diffusion is just another way of saying the spread of phenomenon, the movement of phenomenon. So all of these space relationships. A lot of times the word spatial is just used synonymously for geographic. Plain old geographic would do. For example, if I was talking about the spatial distribution of population, what's the difference between that and saying the geographic distribution of population? Well, it means the same thing. But there are certain times when you're talking about geographic relationships, not all geographic relationships are spatial. Here, let me show you the example of that. We use the term spatial when you're dealing with adjectives and descriptors, where words like these, where area, if in understanding your phenomenon, if areal relationships is a factor, that's a spatial attribute of it. If distance from point A to point B is a factor, that's a spatial relationship. What's the pattern of the layout of that phenomenon? Is it densely clustered? Is it all spread apart and so forth? So how does it, is it isolated? Is it accessible? Does it have connections between other phenomenon? How does it flow and so forth? All of these things, all of those adjectives and relationships, just descriptors, all those characteristics that it helps if you have a map to show it. If you show these things on a map, then you wouldn't have to describe it so much. You'd be able to see the distribution, or you could see how the phenomenon spread from one place to another. All right, all those characteristics and relationships that you need a map to convey. Here is one example. It's of early spatial analysis. There was a cholera outbreak in London, England, in the mid-1800s, and the physician, Dr. John Snow, asked questions that it's surprising not a lot of other people asked about. There was a cholera outbreak in the Soho district, and a lot of people thought that the cholera was something in the air. They weren't exactly sure what caused it. The medicine was not well developed at this time. Well, here's what he did. He was thinking like a geographer, and he looked at things spatially. So here's what he did, was that he had a map of London, and so what he did was he put markers on the places where the death was, all right, where the address of that person. By showing that, it wasn't a random spattering of dots across London. There were particular clusters around particular water pumps. And so, now, instead of having a list of data, well, they would have brought in they would have had a list of the dead person's name and where they lived. And that's how a lot of people think. They think in lists, but geographers want to map things out. And so when they map it out like this, they saw that clustering, zoomed in. We know where we have to shut down those walls, and also found out something that about the characteristics of the disease, that it was a waterborne disease, when previously it was thought it was airborne. All right. Well, that's a basic example of spatial analysis. You have information and you map it out. I won't spend much time with this slide, but this is a distribution of grades. It's always good to talk about on the first day of class, in a class from long. What's the distribution? If you want to look at them as a list, there's more A's than anything else. Right? It's not exactly a bell-shaped curve, but what if you mapped it out? Where did the students sit? And what kind of grades did they earn in the class? Well, you can see that there's kind of a relationship of those that clustered around the front and paid attention. They did better than this back row. It ended up that a lot of students failed the class. So there's a spatial relationship there. All right. Okay. Well, that's all I'm going to say about that. We can talk more about it if you're educated. Well, also one of the things that I like to do on the first day of class is go around the classroom and have you introduce yourself and tell me what your major is and why you took this class and how you think geography might be important to you. But I'll tell you what, we can't do that today. But no matter what your major is, likely there's data that you will use, information you will use, phenomena that you study that have a spatial dimension to them that could be better analyzed with maps. Now, it doesn't matter if you're a biologist and you're studying butterflies, or if you're in criminal justice. Right? Usually there's a few criminal justice majors in the classroom. Is there a geography to crime? Yes, there sure is. Matter of fact, it's kind of common on a lot of these television detective shows where there'll be something like a serial killer on the loose, and the detective is down at the station, has a map of the city behind him, and he's putting push pins in where the victims were taken, and he's putting push pins in where the bodies were dumped. And then a second detective comes in, drinking a cup of coffee, and he's taking a step back. He can see the entire map, and he goes, "Hey!" Meaning that there is probably a pattern to that. Okay, so if you have data, map it out, and maybe it will tell you something. So by mapping out information. It makes you ask questions and visualize relationships that otherwise might not be seen. Okay, now it doesn't matter what your major is. You may be majoring in marketing. Well, you study your markets. Well, very often markets have a geographic dimension to them. Different place, different group that purchase particular things. So target marketing is very often there's a geography to target marketing. All right, so no matter what your major is, likely you will do some type of spatial analysis. The chapters are broken up. About half of the book is physical geography, and about half of the book is human geography. In this class, though, you may be getting social science credit for this class. You'll have to talk to your advisor about your program and what kind of credit that you're getting. There's also another dichotomy in geography, and I need to talk about it, and that's the distinction between regional geography and systematic geography. To tell you a story about this, I'm often asked by other advisors, and they ask, what's the difference between Geography 1010, Principles of Geography, that's the class you're in, by the way, and Geography 1020, World Regional Geography? And here's what I tell them. Well, a class like Principles of Geography is what's called a systematic course, or a topical course, whereas World Regional Geography is an example of a regional geography course. See, now in both of these, you learn about the world, but there's a different approach. With the regional geography approach, you learn about the world, but what you do is you break the world up into regions, and usually you have a textbook where each chapter is one of the major world regions, where one week you talk about Europe, and the next week you talk about the Middle East, and the next week you talk about Anglo-America, and the next week you look at Latin America, the next week you look at Southeast Asia, and so forth. So you break up the world into regions and then study the unique characteristics of each one of those regions. All right, that's regional geography. And you can even have regional geography courses on the individual regions. For example, I sometimes teach a class in the geography of the United States and Canada, in that we can break the United States down into regions and talk about the South or New England, the Pacific Northwest, and so forth, and look at all the regional characteristics. That's one way to study the world, is the regional approach. The other way, and the way that we're doing it, because we're in Principles of Geography, we do things by topic. Okay, we study the world, but we break it up. We go from topic to topic and draw our examples from anywhere in the world. So, for example, one week we look at the landforms. Another week we look at the climates. Another week we look at the population distribution and so forth. So we go subject to subject instead of region to region. Okay, I even get emails from students where they ask me, I'm in your world geography class, and I have to tell them, I'm not teaching world geography this semester. You mean Principles of Geography? Okay, sometimes I think I should make that a final exam question. Ask the student, what class are you in? It should probably be somewhere on the exam anyways. All right, so there's the split between human and physical. There's also the split between regional and systematic geography. Here's another split that's in geography. Is a subject like geography, is it one of these descriptive disciplines where you basically describe things, you look at their qualities, or is geography a highly quantitative discipline where you use numerical analysis? You count things. That's what quantitative means. All right, you use a lot of fancy statistics, mathematical models, and geographic information systems in order to do things. Well, it's kind of both. Through most of geography's history, it's been a fairly qualitative or descriptive discipline, But in recent years, geography has become much, much more quantitative. Matter of fact, for most geographers these days, they have to be an expert in statistics. They have to be an expert on these fancy computer modeling systems called geographic information systems. All right, so geography is a much more quantitative discipline than anybody talks about. All right, okay, let's see. What was the quantitative revolution? Well, unfortunately, in the new edition of the textbook, they took a lot of that information out. I'm putting it back in because I think it's kind of an interesting story. Many of the other disciplines also went through their quantitative revolution, but starting in the 50s and 60s with the advent of high-speed computers, scientists began to be able to study the world quantitatively. Okay, a large amount of data that couldn't be calculated by hand or studied by hand could be put into a computer, and with statistical modeling, work out equations to solve world phenomena. And what's the deal with the image? Because you're wondering what's the deal with that lady there, and what's this river that's going on here? What this is this was from the journal article in the Professional Geographer about the quantitative revolution. This was back in the 60s. And what you have here is that you have qualifactus. Well, he's just a descriptive geographer. He's an aged person too, in that he studied the subject a long time. He probably has a regional specialty, but he's non-mathematical. Whereas this young Turk, or this young guy, is kind of a brute here, though. That's quantifactus. He's all numbers. He's all about building mathematical models to explain geography. And that's kind of what the quantitative revolution was in geography, in that the younger mathematical-oriented geographers took over the discipline, and that's what's shown here. He's kidnapped geography and has taken her over to the quantitative side. One of the things that you can see here is that he's running across the fluvius calculus, because you have to wonder, well, why doesn't qualifactus just go over there and punch quantifactus in the nose and take geography back? Well, he can't cross the river calculus. He can't do. He doesn't have the mathematical background. Now, no matter what your major is, though, I encourage you to take as much quantitative courses as you can. A lot of math and so on. No matter what discipline you're in, there's a lot of young scientists, not only in the natural sciences but in the social sciences too, that they can only go so far in their career because they didn't take enough math, or they don't have the understanding of the mathematical modeling that's so common. Okay, all right. So that's more than you would need to know, but it's unfortunate that they took out the quantitative revolution. But you didn't know it coming into the class, but geography is actually a very quantitative discipline where measuring things and numbers are very important. It's not this just a merely descriptive discipline. Another current trend, which I think is unfortunate in geographic research, is that there has been the increase in the radical Marxist geography and radical feminist geography, and ethnic identity, and so forth, where someone's identity places their value. Here is where the individual isn't that important. That the way a lot of these radicals, Marxists, view you is that you're not an individual. Whatever you are, you're just an icon of your group, which of course is nonsense. And here's a good example of this nonsense. That's a trend. Feminist geographers encourage colleagues not to cite research of white men. Okay, he's a feminist geographer, I guess. Well, if you're not supposed to listen to white men, why should I listen to him? Okay, and unfortunately, it's becoming increasingly common in the journals, articles about such things. Looking at some of the classic definitions of geography, I won't go over all of these, but maybe just a few. The discipline has evolved over time. The purpose of geography is to provide a view of the whole Earth by mapping the location of places from Ptolemy. Yeah, I suppose it is, the inventory aspect. Oh, Immanuel Kant. You may have studied him in a philosophy course. The synoptic disciplines, synthesizing findings of other sciences through the concept of area of space. Okay, yes, because it synthesizes, gets the holistic big picture and so forth. What are some of these other ones? How environment apparently controls human behavior. And then, what? He says, pointing to this one. How environment? No one believes that anymore. Well, geography has evolved as a discipline. That's environmental determinism. That comes up later in the course. All right. So one of the things here with the development of geographic thought, there have been many definitions, many theories, many explanations of where geography fits. Yeah, some of these things are ongoing change. I kind of like this one at the bottom by the human geography, Yifu Tuan. Geography is the study of Earth as the home of people. Yes, it has to relate to people. Even physical geographers study the physical environment. It has to be important to people for some way. Okay. Aha! Place name geography. Well, what place should place name geography have in academia? Let me tell you what place name geography is. And for a lot of you, that might have been what you thought you were going to be studying in this class. Place name geography means the names of places, doing things like, learning all the capitals of the states, or getting a blank map and labeling all the mountain regions of the world and so forth. That's what we call place name geography, learning the names of places. You might even tell a friend that you're taking a geography class, and they probably think, "Oh, well, are you gonna be learning about the capital cities of Europe and that type of thing?" And no, you're not going to do that. That's not what I do. Certainly not in principles of geography. Now, in some of the regional classes, you might spend a little bit more time with that. And in education, in K-12 geography, it's probably a good idea to spend a little bit of time with that, but that's not what I do here. In your textbook and your readings, they use place names, and so you might want to have an atlas or look up some of these places that are being described. But my goal here isn't to memorize place names. That's not what I do. Okay, but for a lot of people, you mention geography, and they'll ask you, "Oh, capitals. What's the capital of Ohio? Is it Cleveland up on Lake Erie, or is it Cincinnati down on the Ohio River?" And, you'd probably tell, "Well, it's neither. It's Columbus, right in the middle of the state." Okay, things like that. And a lot of times those things are just learned as lists, especially with the capitals. In that when an elementary student has to take a geography test on the capitals, they learn to associate a name with the state, the city with the state. Should put them on a map, because there's a bigger question involved in that. All right, yes, so geography is a lot more than just memorizing names and places, because we want to ask questions like, well, the answer is the question where, that's geography, but also some why questions too. Why is it there? And what's the meaning of the word? The human environment interaction as the term. If you see it on a McGraw Hill quiz, though, it may say relationships within places. All right, we'll fix that. Well, you go ahead and graduate, major in education, and when you're running things in social studies, you can make sure that students know about the classic 5 themes. And the 5 themes themselves in higher education and also K-12 education are being supplanted by these national geography standards, which I don't have time to go over all of these, but there's 18 of them. Even though the 5 themes have been supplanted, most teachers that I talk to when they do this in class, and when they assign a student project where they say, make a 5 themes on, one topic that you like, they always go with the 5 themes. It's just easier. There's also what's called the 4 traditions of geography. This is in your textbook, so I'll have to talk about it. The 4 traditions kind of like the themes. There's the original earth science tradition, where in geography's history, at first it was more of a natural science. Matter of fact, if you were taking this class 100 years ago, if you were taking this course 100 years ago, you'd be one of the lucky few that actually went to college back then. And if you were taking a course and it was called something like Readings in Geography, you know what you'd be studying? You'd be studying geology. You'd be studying rocks, minerals, and landforms, and probably some ecology thrown in there as well. So geography grew out of its earth science tradition. Right? But it also has its cultural environment tradition, where that looks at that man-environment relationship. What explains the world? Do environments control what cultures can develop, or does humanity shape the environment? That's cultural ecology. We look at that later in the course. And the locational tradition, well, that was the spatial analysis part of it. An area analysis tradition, that means regional studies, regional geography studies. I'm not going to spend much time with the 4 traditions of geography. And there they are. All right, so to sum up about this course, this is a survey course in geography. All right, it's a survey of the discipline. The depth is affected in that. We have a lot of breadth, but sometimes the depth suffers. So this is a survey course. What do you get? You get a blend of both physical geography topics and human geography. We're going the systematic or topic by topic approach. Each chapter is one of the systematic subfields in geography. And the methods are descriptive methods. This is not a quantitative class. It's not a numerical class. You're not doing a lot of fancy statistics in this class. I don't think any. I mean, you can do geography in college level as a quantitative course, and that is done at some universities. If you were in Durham, UK, you'd probably have a freshman assignment where your professor gives you a set of environmental data and tells you, okay, double the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and then predict what the regional temperature change is going to be like in 50 years. So I mean that can be done, but that's not what we do here. We use descriptive methods. I want you to learn the nuts and bolts about how the world works.